low-key banger at 135 pounds as we have Geraldo de Freitas taking on Tony Gravely. And I mean, Matt, these guys, former champions from different organizations. For Geraldo de Freitas, coming out of Chuto, Brazil, he was their bantamweight champ. For Tony Gravely, he was a champ with CES, King of the Cage, Fight Lab, and PACF before joining the UFC. And it's insane because the guy's only 29 years old and he got into MMA recently, relatively recently, I should say. October 10th, 2015 was Tony Gravely's first fight. So in a span of about 5 years, this guy has 25 fights. He fought 8 times in 1 year. It's absolutely insane, the resume that he's put together too, because we're not just talking about small names. We're talking about well-known household names, even on the regional scene. I mean, fights against Bellator's former bantamweight elite, Ricky Bandejas. That's just one of those. And we'll get into more of them. For Geraldo de Freitas, coming into the UFC, a great win over Felipe Colares. And then in his last time out, didn't go his way, lost a split decision to Chris Gutierrez. If you go over on MMA decisions, a lot of those fellow media members had scored that fight for Geraldo de Freitas. A small number scoring it for Gutierrez, but just on that night, you know how the judges are. Sometimes it doesn't work in your favor. I'm really looking forward to this one because from Geraldo de Freitas, you have that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. You have that pedigree coming out of a great gym in Novo União. And we've seen the improvements in his striking as he's continued on in MMA. For Tony Gravely, black belt in Taekwondo. Hey, Anthony Pettis got to the top of the heap with a black belt in Taekwondo. No matter what Matt thinks about Taekwondo, we're revealed to behind the curtain there. But in terms of this fight, Matt, Tony Gravely has really good wrestling and really, really good forward pressure. And he's one of the smaller guys that you're going to find in this division, but once he steps into the cage, it's not so much so.
Tony Gravely is just compact, and he reminds me a lot of kind of Josh Emmett at 145. Not to say they have the exact same style, but Josh Emmett, what's he really good at? Well, he's a phenomenal wrestler. He's got really big power when he moves forward. Exactly what Tony Gravely does. Geraldo de Freitas, if we do want to have kind of a UFC comparison, NBA draft coming up, a lot of draft night comparisons, Geraldo de Freitas reminds me a little bit of kind of an earlier Charles Oliveira, where he invested very heavily in jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai, and he doesn't really concern himself much with the wrestling defense because De Freitas knows he's not going to exert a lot of his energy trying to take Tony Gravely down or really any of his opponents. Wrestling's not his strong suit. So he just really thinks, well, if I'm going to the ground, I might as well let my opponent take me down. And then worst case, I can try to get a sleep, work some submissions off my back. This is an interesting fight too, just because they do contrast against each other. The wrestling of Gravely along with the jiu-jitsu of De Freitas off of his back, I think will make for a really interesting fight. I think we could see a lot of scrambles in this fight. Tony Gravely's in a really weird camp, though, and we're going to call this the Sarah McMahon camp, where when he's on top, he's got phenomenal ground and pound, just crazy explosive, has some good chokes and submissions of his own, but he is more of kind of a controlling ground and pound type fighter. When he's on bottom, though, it just all goes out the window. He doesn't really get up to his feet all that well. He will try to chain wrestle his way to get back on top. We saw that with Glover Teixeira and Thiago Santos over the weekend in the third round, where Thiago Santos is on top of Glover, landing really good ground and pound, but Glover was able to kind of stay conscious enough and really stay involved enough in the fight to then try to wrestle his way on top. Gravely will do a similar style, but he can tire himself out going for some of those bigger techniques. And it's something that worries me as he fights kind of the upper echelon guys in the UFC, is that if he is going for these big takedowns every time, it's not just a double leg, it's a big slam. Every action are these big actions where if he isn't getting the stoppage from them and the fight is starting to go on, and into those, late second round, third round, and as he moves up the rankings, if he gets into 5-round fights, 4th and 5th, that is going to start to be an issue. The good news, though, I do think just the wrestling and the pure athleticism of Tony Gravely is going to be good enough to get him at least up until that maybe top 30 range, and then he's going to start to run into some problems. But I do like his style, and I do think it's a very buildable style on into the future. He knows what he does well, and he sticks to that. But De Freitas kind of has all the tools that can give a guy like Gravely a lot of problems.
And I mean, that's the thing. You look at Tony Gravely's record, and again, I mentioned some of those names, but Pat Sabatini, the first loss. I mean, hey, Pat Sabatini's actually had a pretty good career if you want to follow up on that one. Ricky Bandejas, the next loss. Then he loses to Merab Dvalishvili. Then he loses to Manny Bermudez. The other one, Patchy Mix. And then Brett Johns in his last time out. Brett Johns, Patchy Mix, Merab Dvalishvili, and Manny Bermudez, I'll say. Good jiu-jitsu, really, really tough guys to fight. I mean, Manny Bermudez, he would still be in the UFC if it wasn't for the weight issues, really.
I mean, know about that.
But that was the major kicker, and the fact that he lost 2 in a row, but still, the weight was an issue. And then the fight against Bandejas is kind of a weird one. He got submitted by a striker who's no longer with Bellator, whose ground game wasn't overly great, and he got submitted by Pat Sabatini. That's one of those things. I really like Tony Gravely's game for sure. He's a very well balanced type of fighter. But again, when he really needs to get to it, and you see a lot of fighters, they get rocked like Glover Teixeira. They get rocked. They're going to take that fight right down to the ground and do exactly what they need to do with the ground and pound and the top pressure. That's what you're going to see out of Tony Gravely. With Geraldo de Freitas, though, you look at it, and maybe the record, it doesn't just jump off of the page. They might not be a lot of names that you might recognize here in North America. And again, we talk about the Shuto title. That's great. I look at the losses. It is what it is. Split decision loss, another decision loss, and then the Gutierrez fight, a split decision loss. He definitely has that jiu-jitsu. He also has decent combinations on the feet. I like his leg kicks, and he's one of those fighters, and we talk about them. He has the combinations, but he has that whip on the end of his shots that I really do like to see. So if we have a look at the odds for this fight, Matt, might be a little bit of a surprise. It's a bit of a surprise to me. Tony Gravely opened a minus 160. That line dropped to a minus 200 very quickly. He's now evened out at a minus 191. If we look at Geraldo de Freitas, opened up a plus 140. He's now at a plus 159. And if we have a look at the total votes, again, it's not so much overwhelmingly. Oh, wait, yeah, it is. Out of 374 total votes, Tony Gravely commanding 83% of those, and 70% of fans picking him to win the fight by decision. So it seems like the odds makers and the bettors have Tony Gravely to get the win. It seems like the fans have Tony Gravely to get the win. Matt, what do you think on this fight?
I also have Tony Gravely to get the win, and here's the X factor I didn't bring up all video. Geraldo de Freitas does one thing that I really do think is going to get him bit in this fight. He drops his hands terribly every single time that anyone does a take-it-down attempt to him. He leaves his chin very high, Luke Rockhold style. I think if Tony Gravely can at least feint the takedown. He doesn't have to be going for the takedown constantly. His stand-up is more than good enough to stand on the feet with a guy like De Freitas. But if he is threatening the takedown, making De Freitas drop his hands, I do think a big overhand is going to be waiting for him eventually as the fight moves on. I think Tony Gravely will be good enough to not get submitted. That's my biggest fear in this fight. And he will be able to start landing big power shots as the fight continues. I think he's got the cardio advantage, the wrestling advantage, and the power advantage, so it's hard not to pick him.
And I mean, that's the thing. You really have to think. Methods of victory for both these guys. Geraldo de Freitas actually very well rounded. And that's the other thing. I mean, we look at the stats. You can't put too much stock into them. I'll show them throughout this video. And I show this for a lot of the fighters that have 3 or more UFC fights. For De Freitas, only has the 2. For Tony Gravely, only has 2 that you can see because the Ray Rodriguez fight on Contender Series counts towards UFC stats. So you got to take these all with a grain of salt. But the takedown defense at 60%. The takedown accuracy at 50%. Geraldo de Freitas fishing for takedowns. He got them against Gutierrez, and he definitely got them against Felipe Clares in his UFC debut. I like the positive striking differential. The other thing for Tony Gravely, very accurate striker, but again, a lot of that's going to take place on the mat. So for me, this fight is a very difficult one to try and pick, but I do like the underdog in this one, Matt. I like Geraldo de Freitas. I think he has more than a good opportunity in this one. Again, I like the volume, and I like the fact that he's not totally lost on the mat. He's not one of those guys that's going to get caught on his back. He's going to try and get out of some of those bad positions. And Tony Gravely struggled against some really high-level jiu-jitsu practitioners in MMA. Will Geraldo de Freitas be that guy? I mean, that's for the fans to decide, and it's ultimately for these two guys to decide. But we'll see. I like Geraldo de Freitas. You've got Tony Gravely.
Okay, so I think the odds are ridiculous. I do think this is a pick'em fight, but I do like Gravely in this one.
Matt's got Gravely. I've got Geraldo de Freitas. I'm really looking forward to this card, Matt. We've got a great main event. Islam Makhachev taking on Rafael dos Anjos in the main event. You're going to want to stick around for that, Matt. And as we always say with Fight Night Picks, let's get into it.